Define, design, refine.
Architect's World. Delving into the field of design. Opening the mind to possibilities. Highlighting opportunities for everyday living. Architect's World. Tuesdays 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. on 92.3 Nigeria Info.
Tuesday is a couple minutes past 2, and what happens at this time every Tuesday is something called Architect's World. This is where we look at the built environment with a view to understanding it and, of course, helping us make better decisions. I do not do this. Well, I don't do it. I just, listen. Architect Bozimo is our professional in the studio. Hello, Architect Bozimo.
Hi, good afternoon, Sam.
Good afternoon.
Wonderful listeners.
Thanks for joining us.
Enjoyable topic just before now.
Don't mind us. Privacy, secrecy, all of them, which is important. Anyways, happy new month. How's February?
That's true. Well, it started very well. We had our first meeting of the National Institute of Architects River State chapter yesterday. It was an annual general meeting, and we're trying to get things going properly in the built environment for this year, for this state, for the nation.
Your Excellency, sir, was the able chairman in that meeting? At that meeting?
As a matter of fact, he favored us with his awesome presence.
Oh my goodness!
And he was going to be here today, but he has a higher calling, a mission today with the authorities. And of course, we expect him to go there and represent us ably.
Well, you know what they say: uneasy lies the head that wears the crown.
Especially when the spaces are open.
Yes, that's a very good addition. I guess if you can hear me, well done, sir. Your Excellency, your magnificence. Oh my goodness, I'm actually glad that he emerged the chairman, and I believe his administration is coming on well.
Kicking off, and he has the support of the entire populace of all caliber of architects in the state.
Wonderful. All right, so our focus for today is material selection, factors in material selection. Of course, we know that without materials, all the grammar we speak with Architects World, there will be nothing to talk about. I remember you and I talked on the show, and I remember talking about Adobe.
Right, one of many possible materials. Indeed, one of the most, if you call it, native materials to most parts of the world.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally earth.
It's not as mainstream now
No,
as
not
it was
anymore.
then.
Exactly.
Yeah, so these are some of the things to consider. Why was it big then and it's not big now? Why did they choose it? What did it provide? What did it lack?
Exactly.
All of those are important conversations.
Part of it, exactly.
All right.
You're right. Starting even, as you said, in that historical form. We've all heard of the ziggurats of Ur. They were once one of the 7 wonders of the world, but they're almost nowhere to be found right now. You know why? They were made, unlike the pyramids in Egypt, they were mostly made, or at least faced with stone. The ziggurats of Ur, which were pyramidal in form, were made mostly of earth, adobe. And so they suffered more from erosion and all that, and have literally disappeared. They are known because of their magnificence then, but they don't exist the way the Egyptian pyramids do. And if only the people of Ur had known, maybe they would have used a more durable material. Now, adobe, as I said, is native to anywhere on planet Earth, because fundamentally adobe is earth. That it is mud, mixed in a certain way. Sometimes they entrain things like grass and other things to make it have a bit more stability, and then it is applied. And many of the good things about Adobe One is its easy availability. It's right there under your feet in most circumstances. It's relatively easy to gather it, to process it, to transport it, to apply it, to finish it, with the hands and all that. Sometimes when it's finished, it has this nice look about it, and it can be, let's say, appealing. Also, because it's the earth, it tends to keep a very relatively stable temperature within the structure, whatever you've done. And so it has those as many of its advantages. But again, it's not a very precise material. You know, you can have variations in the source of the material, the way it's applied. So it has those negatives. And at the end of the day, some people maybe moved away from it as people became more industrialized, more formal about what materials they use. So have you ever wondered why somebody says, I want a 3-bedroom bungalow here, another person has a 3-bedroom bungalow elsewhere? Apart from the design, they tend to look kind of different.
Yeah.
It could be, I mean, you have different parts perhaps in Nigeria. You have different parts around the world. Yet people are being accommodated similarly in, you know, accommodation of a similar number of rooms and other assorted spaces, but they all look different. Sometimes, of course, is the style that the person chooses, the aesthetic, then the availability of materials and even the people to work them. For example, in the United States, they tend to use timber for most of their residential construction. And in fact, for most of their commercial construction, they tend to use steel as the structural framework with various facades and different wall cross sections because of their climate and all that. So over there, you find a lot of people excellent in utilizing wood to frame the walls and the materials on the inside and on the outside. You don't find much of that kind of construction here because we don't have, except in very few high-level construction companies, the capacity to process wood in the same way, to that precision.
Really?
You'd be amazed how nice wood can look when you see it in those stores like Home Depot abroad. You just see wood looking like a ruler, but it's 12 feet long, 3.6 meters long. It's amazing. You can put that side by side with another piece of wood. You cut it in precision ways. You put it within panels of plywood or gypsum board and you get nice, flat, beautiful walls. Here, our wood does not seem to be processed that same way. The wood may tend to warp and bend just because it hasn't been put in the kiln sufficiently long. Maybe the variety of wood being used. There, they have an entire industry in wood. Here is not so much. You have a bit of wood here, but not to that great extent.
Oh, well, our wood here is firewood.
You see, that's just it. The wood we have here, we haven't chosen to use it as construction wood, except for supporting when you're pouring, you know, slabs and all that. We do use wood also for form work. We use the wood to shape the concrete, but not necessarily as a structural element itself.
I get that.
It's about the custom in a given area. Here, what do we tend to use? We tend to use what we term sandcrete blocks. Blocks that are shaped in the characteristic way with two hollows in the middle. They have this H look, or you know, like figure 8, square figure 8, and they're made out of sand and cement. The high quality ones have a bit of granite dust in them. Those are very, very strong. But often enough, even the ones that you find locally made, people don't bother to put too much cement sand because the way the structure of many buildings is, it's the concrete frame that bears all the loads.
Let's go back to that wood conversation.
Yes.
What does bamboo bring to the table?
Aha, you know, funny. In Asia, bamboo is actually used a lot for scaffolding. You can find people building 80-story buildings using bamboo as the scaffolding that they use to erect it.
And it requires the required support?
No, it provides the required
support.
support because bamboo is an amazing material. It seems to take a long time to initially grow, like 5 years. Then after 5 years, it just shoots up and it's available for the harvesting. It's a very organic material, meaning when it's finished its life cycle, it can deteriorate and form part of the earth and renew the earth, which is one advantage of another consideration when you're talking about material selection these days. The age of the material. Plastics have their purpose and use, but they don't deteriorate, they don't degrade. and they stay they don't decompose.
Yeah.
And so they can enter the ecosystem and last for 1,000 years, which is not a very good thing. We're suffering currently from plastic pollution in our oceans, rivers, streams, and generally that's part of what causes all the flooding and, blocks inside our drain systems.
Surely.
Plastic does not deteriorate. So that's a separate conversation. So what is it among the things that affect the kind of materials we choose? I said earlier, there's a style. An owner perhaps has a vision of what their project should look like and how it should perform.
Okay.
And so they are well within their rights and expected, in fact, for them to give us an idea of what they want. And then we, as architects, now convert those initial ideas, and they can come in any form. They can be conversation, you can point at a building, you can show me images online or in a magazine, you can refer me to something. That's fine. It's my job as an architect to take all your cues and put them together in a format that now I reflect back at you to say, this is the combination of all the things you said, sir, madam. And that is, of course, is an ongoing conversation that can result in what the person will now see. So these materials, what do we use materials for? We use them for the structure of the building. We use them for finishing the building. We use them to cut the building. We use them outdoors, indoors,
For everything, really.
for everything in the built environment. So starting right from the outside of a potential project, what do you have? You have your driveways, you have your curbs, you have your fences. So what is involved first in that fence? Of course, your block walls. We tend to use block walls, but some people actually use concrete, precast concrete slabs that they can slide into pre-positioned columns, and you have a very thin but very strong fence, and it has its own advantages and disadvantages. If you want to do a fence very, very fast, you can go and purchase these precast slabs, install the columns in between, and you can build that fence so fast, unlike when you, of course, use your normal blocks and it's one at a time, one at a time, one at a time. So every material you tend to use has its advantages and disadvantages. The panels may cost more, but the time the labor is involved is less. So at the end, you might find that there's a balance between which material you choose, one or the other.
The blocks we use here, which you described earlier, why do they have those why do they have those spaces in them?
Now, typically, one thing is those spaces help to insulate the wall. You know, our weather here, we're struggling with keeping heat out. So when you have an air space within the wall, such as is created by those blocks, when the sun strikes the outside of the block, it might make that surface hot. But that heat doesn't easily transmit across that air space to the inside.
So it traps the heat.
It traps or it delays the heat. So in the hot part of the day, you might find that the indoors is cool. If you have done other architectural things like shaded your walls, protected your windows, there are things you can do. Of course, the entire exterior of the building is an entire design element itself, aimed at protecting you from the vagaries of the weather, both the sun, rain, wind. So that's an entire design element, but it typically, yes, comprises of those blocks stacked one atop the other. You have openings in terms of your windows and your doors. Then, of course, you will cap the top of the building with something as a roof. All this now creates your external shell. Within the building, you can even use, if you want, wood walls and all that. You can subdivide it any way you want, but typically we also use those blocks. In Nigeria, we tend to have two sizes. We have the 225 mm or 9-inch block, which is the wider one. Then we have the 6-inch or 150 mm block. Sometimes people also use solid blocks. Those are only about 100 mm or 4 inches thick. They are dense. They have no space in between.
Like a brick.
They are like a brick.
Yeah.
They are fairly big. They're thick, solid. People use them as well. It just depends on what application you might be using.
Yeah, so if people use that, are those blocks stronger? Because I imagine that with that space, it compromises strength. I just imagine it may not be true.
Ironically, when you take the total area of the typical blocks we're used to with the holes, you take the thickness of the web, you subtract the air space in between and put next to that thickness, you find that they may be dragging in terms of width. Not exactly, but the structure of that block also gives it more resistance because it is spaced out and it has, things going across.
Yeah.
Yes, those solid blocks would tend to be more robust because you simply can't crush them.
Yeah.
But a well-made block of the Sankri type, the kind that has some cement sand dust in it, is very, very strong. In fact, there's a test you tend to do. You take a block, you hold it about 1 meter above the ground and drop it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't crack, that's a very well-made block. And you have to make sure it has cured. You don't just take it when it was cast yesterday and drop it on the ground. Of course, it'll break.
Yeah.
Give it some time to cure, and then once they can withstand that, you know that they are sufficient for building your walls. But again, as I say, we tend not to. You see, there are two types of walls. There's the load-bearing wall and the non-load-bearing wall. Back in the day, you would typically look for the strongest blocks you could find because by the time you built up the walls, you were going to cap it with a roof, and that roof has to resist wind and other loads.
Yeah.
But typically now, we make what you call frame structures. The structural engineer just computes where the key loads are on the structure.
Yeah.
They place columns and beams appropriately. And what that does, it gives you flexibility. You can actually knock some walls in between without the entire structure coming down. So there's that. You don't need the block to be that strong.
So even architecture is looking for the easy way out?
No, architecture is giving you flexibility. Because before, when you had only a load-bearing wall, it meant wherever we decided the walls was permanent. If you dared touch that wall, you ran the risk of compromising your roof or whatever is above. But now, with the frame structure, which is much, much more contemporary, you can much more easily move walls in between. You can make punch holes in them, create different functions inside, even after you've done the structure. So your strength is one of the key things you're going to always think about for a material. What is this material intended to do? Where is it to be placed? And how will I maintain it? These raw materials we're talking about, your concrete in your columns, your slabs, your beams, those are typically going to be covered with, rendering, that's cement sand rendering, and paint. So paint is one of the first materials that we typically select. Where is this paint to be used? Is it going to be used on the exterior? Is it going to be used on the interior? Is it going to be subject to heat, humidity, wet surfaces? Is it just going to be more about visual appeal? The type of paint you use is going to be specifically suited to where that surface is. You tend to find there's what we call it gloss, but it's simply the paint that has more of an oil component.
Okay.
People tend to use those in areas where you're going to have moisture or humidity. Maybe some parts of your kitchen, if you're not tiling all the way to the ceiling.
To give it some shine.
To give it some shine and maybe make it easier to wipe down in terms of maintenance, okay? And in a bathroom where you might have your hot water bath and everything, you don't want the paint that is emulsion, because that could be suffused with humidity and begin to flake off, depending on how it's applied. So that's one of your first things, your paint. Then the same spaces we're talking about, you have your main lounge, maybe in a residence, you have your kitchen, you have your bathrooms. What do you use on the floors? What do you use on the walls? What do you use on the ceilings? You can say, okay, I'm going to use ceramic tiles, but the ceramic tiles you might choose to use within the bathroom, you would try to look for something that has a bit of frictional resistance.
A grip.
Because you know that is a space that tends to have water on the floor or moisture. And since architects are always primarily concerned with your life and safety within any spaces you're using, you'd want to use a tile that will prevent you from slipping. But it's a delicate thing. You don't want a tile that is so rough that you can't keep it clean, because one of the other things you want in the bathroom is to have the perception of it being spotless when you're cleaning it. You don't want it to be so rough that even when you're cleaning, there are streaks in there. So it's that kind of delicate balance. And what happens that we tend to, at that point when we're specifying, we tend to ask the supplier, bring me a selection of tiles, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 different tiles. Then based on our expectation of performance and on the client's taste, we now make a choice. Some of these choices have different costs, but we'll always balance the aesthetic and the cost versus the function.
Now, have you had situations where you had specific needs? Because what you've described now is a specific need. You need a particular kind of tile in the bathroom that would give a particular kind of feature to provide a particular kind of feeling and aesthetic. So when you're putting down these specifics and making that order from the market, have you had a situation where that material you couldn't get it from the market based on the specific need?
Fortunately, we have a wide variety of supply sources. And typically, we have, fortunately, many suppliers who do their utmost to meet your needs. They will bring you samples. You will select from them. If you don't find, they will go far afield. You see, this entire industry is built on a lot of collaborative work. For the person who can bring you what you need, he knows he has already made a very serious impact. And should you be faced with a similar or a different situation next time, he or she might be the first person you call. So there's a win-win for them to actually meet your need. I haven't really come across a situation where we cannot get a material. Come on. You'd be amazed what people have available.
No, but I'm saying, Architect Bozimo, you might have one client that has some, I want the living room to light up this way, and I want to feel, just something that I wouldn't say you haven't done before, but it was a need you did not think would be relevant for a particular space in the house, and a particular material, or even a mixture of materials, in degrees that are not market available.
Well, first of all, I'd love such clients, because nothing excites a design architect more than a challenge that needs to be met and overcome. So you have that kind of client with a very interesting request. It's a beautiful challenge, and you work with the person, you work with what's available. And you know what? At the end of the day, nothing is unavailable as long as the person is prepared to pay. So part of our role would be to say, okay, we've exhausted the local market, we've gone around Nigeria, we've gone to Kano, we've gone to Aba, we've gone to Enugu, we've gone to Lagos, we can't find it. Now, online, you will find it somewhere. So if you are ready for us to go to Southern Australia and import 3 square meters of this material by plane, train, and automobile for X cost, we will make it happen. Typically, that is when the owner might say, you know what? That need I had is not worth that cost.
It's not a need, it's a want.
It's a desire, right?
It's just one of those.
And so that's why I keep saying these things are ongoing conversations. They don't stop. The goal at the end of the day, design is really a compromise between what is desired, what's available, and what's possible. At all times, one may predominate, but at the end of the day, you want to get the satisfaction from the owner.
Now, has availability ever affected work to degrees where you had to change focus? Just like the example I gave. You're obviously going to explore the local market first and then go to other markets that are closed before you try to go as far as possible. Have you had situations where availability was the major difference in the project?
Availability is often connected with price. So yes, there have been times when, you look at a possible initial thought, and based on the complications of that specific thing, it is always within the architect's role to specify the first or the alternate. In fact, many times in the build of quantities that our quantity surveyors create based on our specifications, you typically have use XYZ material or approved equivalent. So what can happen? You have out there that you want X. Now, a contractor who is savvy and who has a source could present to you an alternative.
Okay.
It will be now up to him to convince the team why this material could be used in place of the one originally specified. They have to bring the material cut sheets, the standards that the material has been made to, the method of application, all these things. And then the architect now assesses what is being presented as an alternative versus what was initially specified. And once you can create that equivalent, sometimes it can bring you something better. And again, every design is an opportunity for everybody to learn.
Yeah.
So if you see a better material, you file it away in your Rolodex and you go ahead and specify it. But typically, you'll be trying to control for price. You cannot bring me an alternative and tell me it's 16 times the cost. Will you find me what I looked for? But if you can give me something at equal or better cost, you might actually help the project and even save time and energy and money.
So there are so many things to